Hi, Misha here, and I've already covered the German U-boats, as well as several other submarines, including Japanese and French. So now it's time to give American subs some attention. Specifically this time, we're going to look at the Balao class. This was the most numerous submarine in U.S. naval service in the Second World War, with 120 built and a couple of others partially built or lost during construction. So some people said the total is 124. Doesn't matter. And this is a very large, very capable sub, and was extremely advanced for the day. It also has a bit of personal meaning to myself. This was an update of the Gato class. Now, the Gato itself was kind of the combination of a fast fleet submarine, something able to keep up with the main fleet. And America was primarily interested in long-range ocean-going subs, not coastal types, because their main thrust, they knew, would be in the Pacific. Not the Atlantic, not the Mediterranean. So the Gato itself was quite a large submarine. And really, the Balao class is just a stronger Gato class. In 1941, experts met and tried out an experimental Gato that had a slightly thicker hull, but more importantly, it was made out of a new steel alloy. The Gato had a test depth of about 300 feet, and this new hull design could go much deeper. In reality, it could go past 600 feet, but the technology of the early 1940s was such that it was only safe at the time to have a test depth of about 400 feet. Still yet, that's a 25% improvement over the Gato class, and again, it could go deeper if necessary. On top of that, I had the latest features and whatnot from the Gato. And so by 1942 they started ordering these ships. Boats, I guess. They were just under 312 feet long. Had a crew of 10 officers and anywhere from 68 to 71 men. They had 10 torpedo tubes, 6 in the front, 4 in the aft, with a total of 24 torpedoes on board, so more than enough reloads for each tube. They were capable of going over 20 knots on the surface and just under 9 knots submerged. And they could cruise for 75 days without resupply. Again, these were built for the Pacific, so long-range patrols. The only downside to that is their dive time wasn't the best in the world, but that's kind of the trade-off. You even see that with the German Type 7 versus Type 9 submarines. But anywho, the first of these entered into service in February of 1943 and would soon start war patrols in the Pacific. Early on, they were fitted with one 4-inch deck gun, as well as a double 20mm anti-aircraft cannon and a single 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannon. But by late 43, the 4-inch gun was being replaced by a 5-inch gun. And then in late 1944, some in this class were even given 2 5-inch guns. It was quickly discovered that in the Pacific there were a lot of little ships and whatnot, and it wasn't really economical, since resupply wasn't nearby, to always use a torpedo up, so the deck gun was an invaluable tool. Luckily for the Balao class, it did not have to suffer much through the Mark 14 torpedo. That was finally getting fixed by the time this came into service. Although it did get to experience the Mark 18 torpedo, which had its own specialness. There are a few ships of note. This model here is one 350 scale diecast from Atlas. It is of the USS Archerfish, which is historically famous because it sunk the largest ship of any submarine. It sunk a Japanese aircraft carrier of over 59,000 tons. Other carriers were sunk by subs, but it was the largest one. The USS Tang was the largest ace of the war, with 33 ships to its credit and over 116,000 tons. Unfortunately, Tang's final sinkage was itself. That Mark 18 torpedo I talked about, it had a nasty habit of making a big circle, and sometimes if it couldn't find another target, homing back in on the vessel that fired it. So Tang shot itself at the end. 8 or 9 survived, but most of the crew did not, and those that survived had to suffer through a Japanese POW camp. Probably the last submarine to be shot down in the war or sunk in the war was the USS Bullhead. She was destroyed by Japanese planes on August 6th, 1945. In total, 9 subs would be lost in World War II. And then 2 more post-war. Because not only did these continue in service after World War II, they kept building them. They built about a dozen after the war, with the final one completed in September of 1948. So they definitely had a post-war history. 46 were also given, loaned, or sold to foreign nations, one of which was to Taiwan, who, believe it or not, still has her in service to this very day. So yes, one of these submarines is still in service, at least as of 2019. Many others continued in U.S. service through the Korean War and even in the Vietnam War. Still in service, a few in the early 70s, and actually the final one was not struck off the registry, decommissioned, until 1975. After World War II, 50 or so were upgraded. Some were given a simple upgrade package of a snorkel. Others were given a more complicated upgrade package known as Guppy, which was all new batteries so it could stay underwater longer, operate longer. A couple were turned into guided missile submarines in the 50s, becoming some of the first guided missile subs in the U.S. arsenal. And a couple of others were turned into underwater transports designed to carry a landing craft and, special forces units. and still others were used for training and research. Now, the reason I said this has some note to me, well, the Archerfish doesn't, but the Batfish does. The Batfish is a museum today in Muskogee, Oklahoma, very near to where I live. And when I was young, my family took me there and I traipsed through the ship. Now, the Batfish herself was ordered in May of 1942. She was laid down at Portsmouth in Maine in December. And she was launched in May of 43, commissioned in August of 43, and was underway on her first war cruise in December of that year. And in February of 1944, in just over 3 days, she had a pretty remarkable feat of sinking 3 Japanese enemy submarines in a row, giving her a very interesting record. And these were not her only victories. She sank other ships during her career. And then she returned to port after the war and was decommissioned in April of 1946 and kind of laid up, mothballed, and used for some training, but kept more or less at ready, which was good because in January of 1952 she was reactivated, recommissioned, and after just 2 months she was ready to go to war and launched in March of 52 and would take place in operations, training, and other operations in the Caribbean, in North Atlantic, in that time period. She would continue to have active service until 1957. Then she would kind of be laid up again in 58. And then in 1960, she would be kind of loaned out as a research submarine, experimental submarine, which she did throughout the 60s, as well as some various training cruises. And then she was once again decommissioned towards the end of 1969 and went to the Boneyard in New Orleans. Now, originally, Oklahoma wanted to acquire the USS Piranha. It was also a Balao-class submarine, but through various reasons, this didn't happen right away. And then they got to looking at Piranha and Batfish, and they discovered a couple of things. For one, Batfish had a more interesting service record, and for another, it was in better condition and had more of its original parts. And therefore, in 1971, a deal was struck where the U.S. Navy and government would basically donate the USS Batfish, SS 310, to the state of Oklahoma, where it would be used to, educate the young and be a museum and a memorial. So work started in 1972 to get this to Muskogee, which turned out to be quite a chore. They had several mishaps, and there were a few times they weren't sure they were going to be able to get it up the Arkansas River, but ultimately they did. She had a temporary home before her final resting place at the Memorial Park overlooking the Arkansas River was ready. So she opened on July 4th, 1972 as a temporary exhibit, and then was finally put at her new home in May of 1973. It opened up and was ready for the Memorial Day weekend. And a few years later, I was there. A really neat ship. They've always been open and encouraging of young people to come in and check it out. They even have sleepovers with certain school troops and stuff where you can stay in the crew quarters, and they have all the equipment there, the periscope. And it was in very good condition, but unfortunately, a year ago, or just under, May of 2019, it was quite severely damaged because of flooding. I've said in many of our May Mishaco videos that we've had a lot of rain here in this region last year. So much so that it damaged a submarine. Let that sink in. We've had so much rain here, it damaged a submarine. So it's been closed to the public for the last 11 months or so, and they're trying to raise money to restore the USS Batfish. So if you would like to help, I'll probably end up putting a link in the description. And if by the time you see this video, it is open again and you're nearby, you should also go check it out. Interestingly, there's another Balao class here in North Little Rock, the USS Razorback, SS 394. I've actually never been to that one. Technically, even though it's in another state, the Batfish is closer. Just a neat submarine. Again, it's very large and whatnot, but it needed to be for its purpose. Very combat capable, built upon generations of lessons learned about subs and built very well. I think they were built by about 5 shipyards in America. They served with many foreign nations during and after World War II, including many South American. Even Canada got in on the action and had one. Very iconic American sub, and pretty much the pinnacle of diesel electric technology before the switch over to nuclear power. 8 museum ships survive today, which is so not bad. Plus, again, there is an active submarine in Taiwanese service still, which I just find really cool. But yeah, I just thought I would share this. As I've said in my other videos with the Atlas models, they're very heavy die-cast, with only the small bits being the plastic. Otherwise, the hull is not just metal, but it's solid metal. It's not hollow. They have the cutouts so you can look inside. And they come on a nice little wooden plinth with the metal nameplate of the sub. And they don't cost a whole lot. They're about $25. For the quality, I think it's quite good. Personal opinion, but there you have it. But I had to get this one because of having seen the Batfish as a small kid and it making an impression on me. And it was really good for me because it was one of those museums you could actually run around and touch things. It wasn't all behind glass. As you might imagine, those kinds of museums, well, in theory, I would love them. In practice, they don't really do much for me. Anyway, if you like submarines, you can check out some of my other videos. Any questions or comments, please post them below. And as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.